Welcome to day 7 of our daily Bible reading. Thank you for coming with me as we work our way through God's Word and listen to what God has to say for us today. So our readings today come from Genesis chapter 18 and 19, Psalm 3, and Luke chapter 7. Now, we are continuing in the Abraham story in Genesis. And it's interesting here, the story portrays Abraham as heroic, but he is also politely demanding justice in his conversation with God. This is one of those places where we are reminded that God is living in relationship with us and that he wants to have a conversation with us. Abraham shows us how we can engage with God and be intercessors, meaning we can stand up for other people and I don't want to say have a negotiation, but have a conversation, have a debate, present a case to God for perhaps making a different decision, going in a different way. Now, in this story, Abraham has a brother, Lot, who, in comparison with Abraham, is making some bad choices. Lot does not have his life together and is going in some very different directions. This part of the story sets Abraham up as the first prophet in the Jewish tradition. He is asking for mercy, and it's interesting that when you look at what he's saying, he is not asking for mercy for the innocent and for God to punish the guilty, but instead he asks for an entire city to be saved because there are innocent people there. Now, this is a request that is really a challenge to many of us in American culture today, because for a lot of us, justice is about fairness. The guilty will be punished and the innocent will be set free. But here, Abraham is really challenging our sense of retribution, because by asking for an entire city to be saved, he's really setting this up that some of the bad guys are going to be saved too. In order to save the innocent, there are going to be times when the not innocent will also benefit. And I think this is a real challenge for us today. We want everyone to get what they deserve in our way of thinking. And Abraham expands that sometimes what we deserve is more than what we deserve. And he is really asking for more than what makes us comfortable sometimes. And so our real deep question here is, can the innocent spare the guilty? Abraham is also a role model for humility for us. He shows extravagant generosity. Lot, in contrast, is very passive. He doesn't take a lot of action. He does not intercede on behalf of other people, and he's not very generous. When the strangers who have visited Abraham come to Lot, Lot is giving him the smallest amount that he can and get away with offering hospitality. In comparison, Abraham went above and beyond and took direct action even before his wife or his servants to be able to give lots to the strangers who came by and visited Abraham and Sarah. So Abraham is setting a standard of living with kindness and generosity and fairness to everyone around him. As we move to Psalm 3, I love how the psalm ends, that real help comes from God. Now, for many scholars, they believe this may have been the first psalm that was recorded. Psalms are traditionally sung, and often they used a stringed instrument in ancient days. As you read through the Psalms, and this is the first one in this reading plan for us, you may come across a word, Selah, S-E-L-A-H. And it is often seems to be just stuck in between verses or at the end of lines in certain Psalms. And I just want to say, for those of you who are like, what is this word? It is a Hebrew word, and there's uncertain meaning. No one's quite sure what it is. So don't worry about trying to figure out this word as you're reading through the Psalms. But one interesting thing about Psalm 3, it concludes by moving from the individual experience, I statements, to a we statement, a whole people statement. So, my God helps me, your blessing clothes your people. And I think this is really important for us to pick up on as we are reading through the Hebrew Bible, is our God is not a God of just individual relationships. Yes, he has an individual relationship with Abraham, but so that Abraham can become the father of nations, and so God can have a relationship with an entire people. Throughout the Hebrew Bible, any of the rules and laws that you read that we'll be getting to in Deuteronomy and Leviticus, the Ten Commandments in Exodus, these are all about how we build a relationship with God and how we maintain our relationship with our community. There have been some Christian traditions that have really emphasized the personal salvation, individual relationship between a single person and God. But as you read through the Bible, pay attention to just how often God is actually speaking about the entire group, the entire tribe, the entire people, and the emphasis is not on an individual, but on the whole community living together. For Luke chapter 7, we have a statement, "I have never seen such great faith." And this statement refers to a Roman military leader. Now, this is just really amazing because the Jewish people were oppressed by the Romans. The Romans were the bad guys. The Romans were the latest in a long string of empires who had come in and taken over the Jewish people's lives. And here, Jesus is lifting up a Roman military officer as a person of great faith. So this is a person who is outside the Jewish faith, but is showing a commitment to God. And Jesus acknowledges that. We now have a series of verses that are talking about healing a blind person. It's easy for those of us who have sight and take our sight for granted to kind of skip over these sections. Oh, this doesn't really apply to me. I'm not blind. I haven't experienced this. I don't know a lot of blind people. But I think as we're reading through it today, I wonder, what is it that we are blind to in our lives? My guess is that all of us, if we take a little time to think, realize that there are things that we don't want to see, that we work hard not to see, or that we are oblivious to, and we don't even know it exists. So there are many people of privilege who've had a certain experience in life who are blind to the injustice that other neighbors are experiencing. Maybe it's injustice due to economics and lack of income. Maybe it's injustice due to the color of skin or their country of origin. But many of us either are intentionally or unintentionally blind to the experience of the people around us. So I think the story of being healed from blindness can apply to every single one of us if we take the time to realize, I am blind to something. Lord, please heal my blindness. Some of the things that I've been thinking about as far as blindness this week is in the area of climate change. We have rising oceans and warming oceans, and Hurricane Helene has recently come through and has caused the deaths of many people and utter destruction of so many communities. There are people without insurance. There are questions if people will rebuild, if people will have to move. And for those of us who live in Wisconsin, sometimes it's like, we're living in God's country. We feel like we have a lot fewer disasters. We have a calmer climate and fewer risks in our lives. But does that mean we are blind to the very real experience that other people are going through in other parts of the world? And are we willing to make personal changes to help the earth around the planet heal and support our neighbors who are living in other places? John the Baptist has a little bit in here again, and there's a question about that Jesus asks, wondering why people go to listen to John the Baptist. And he points out, are you going to see his fancy clothes, his fancy house? Because obviously John the Baptist didn't have that. He was wearing bizarre things. He was eating very simple foods out in the wilderness. He was a true prophet. But this is another thing that I think is challenging for us today. When we think about what we look at on social media, what shows we're streaming, how many of the shows are about rich and wealthy people, the Real Housewives, Bridgerton. A lot of these things are set in family succession that are about wealth that is unimaginable for 99.9% of humans. But why are we drawn to these stories and why are we looking at them? And the bigger question is, are we willing to listen to the prophets who aren't rich, who aren't wealthy, who don't live these fabulous lives? Jesus finishes up this chapter talking about how wisdom is proved right through the behavior of children and that we need a more humble approach to God. At the very end of the chapter, Jesus is eating with some of the religious Jewish leaders, and they're mad that he forgives an outcast woman. But Jesus makes the point that she's the one that welcomes Jesus extravagantly, which ties into the extravagant hospitality and generosity that Abraham showed in our Genesis readings. And the leaders were more like Lot. They did the absolute minimum necessary to be hospitable. His point is that great love leads to the outcast woman being forgiven, and that small love leads to petty thoughts, because it's clear that the Pharisees are not getting the big picture that Jesus is trying to share. They are very much in the petty area. So faith is what heals brokenness, not status or credentials. So thanks for reading with us today, and we'll see you next time.